Good morning. Let's go ahead and get started. So we'll be going through today like a refresher on what creates our encumbrances, what releases those encumbrances. It's important to understand the differences of those so that as we see encumbrance balances, we know where we can look. We're going to go through some different ways to find that through the financial report, um, custom views you can use if you're not using them now to help you take care of your pending materials. We'll look at a dimension balance report, purchasing transaction detail report, and then also a couple of just like purchase order management stuff, how we can email vendors POs directly through Intacct without having to print them or save them as a PDF and do it that way. Or if you need to send multiple POs at one time, how that can be done too. And then we'll talk about closing POs at the end of this. So on the slides for creation, on the right side here, these are the transactions that create an encumbrance. These and only these. We have a purchase requisition, the contract service requisition, indirect cost voucher requisition. So for those of you who are charged indirect cost, if you see an encumbrance there, this is the document that's been created. Our travel requests, and then our confirmed vendor amounts, which originates from a travel request vendor payment, but the encumbrance doesn't happen until we've confirmed the cost of the flight or other travel related costs that's done in this through this workflow. And of course, none of these happen, none of the encumbrance is created until either any of these documents are fully approved. Not just because we've created the request, it has to be fully approved. And so that's an important thing to know. We just kind of ran through the deal like this in December and November with people requesting travel. You're relying on Intacct for your balances, and so we put in 5 different travel requests that don't impact our budget, and then not realizing until the middle of the approvals, now suddenly someone can approve these because the first 2 took up the budget. Now there isn't enough available to travel for the other 3, causing a delay and hardship and an irritation on everyone's part now that budget mods are needed to send someone on travel. So keep in mind that our encumbrances only happen, our general ledger is only affected when these things are approved. And with that said, and something to keep in mind when we get to the purchase custom views is once these things are approved, that means a purchase requisition is either going to be converted or pending. No other status in the purchase requisition workflow would tell us that there's an encumbrance or possible encumbrance. Same thing for contract service requisitions, the indirect cost requisitions, travel, and confirmed vending amounts, confirmed vendor amounts. We're looking for pending or converted. The stuff that releases these encumbrance are vouchers, the justification workflow if it originated from a purchase order, not a standalone one that we've created. Our travel reconciliations, if we cancel a trip or we close a purchase order. Once these things are fully approved, that's when an encumbrance is released. And those are the only circumstances that release one. A declined voucher doesn't take care of your encumbrance. Drafting a justification doesn't do that. We have to take action through one of these things to clear our encumbrances. And so when we get to the custom view part of this, we're going to be looking for vouchers that are closed or not closed. Justifications, travel recs, cancel trips, and closed partial purchase orders should all have the same status of closed to tell us that the transaction we've done has been completed, it's been approved, and now the encumbrance related to it has been cleared. So if we still have encumbrances and we've done any of that stuff, we're going to need to start looking for our POs that could be pending, partially converted, vouchers or justifications that aren't approved yet, purchase orders that we may have closed but used the wrong period, and those types of things. So let's get started here into Intacct. So the profile I'm using is a demo account that I have set up for IT access. Most of us, when we're looking at our encumbrances, are probably starting with our reports. And depending on the type of fund you're using is going to determine which report you're running, whether it's a fiscal year report or life to date. The fund I'm using through IT works only year to year, so they're going to use the fiscal year report. If you have contracts that last multiple years, you'd be using the life to date report. But for today, we're going to look at fiscal year reports. So as this runs, a majority of us are probably running this report in some capacity, sometime throughout the work week or whenever we were running into an issue where we're looking up the information about our funds. We're going to see something like this with our budget, our open encumbrance balances, and then our expenses. So this is informative as in it tells us what our encumbrances are. Doesn't really tell us what those could be though. And so the very first step we could look if we wanted to find what our balances might be coming from, it's when we run these reports, particularly the ones that say one funding source view, the balances have a blue hyperlink, which takes us to a general ledger report. So if I click the balance of utilities, it's going to take us to what those utility balances are. So we can still see the $1,500, but at this point, there's enough transactions that it would be pretty difficult for us to tell what vendor that may be from or what transaction it relates to. So this might not be the most efficient means of finding our encumbrance balance beyond just the amount. So while this report's great for getting us this amount, the detail part of that is where it's going to be tough for us to use. One of the reports that we can rely on to get more information about what might be contributing to this utilities balance is a dimension balance report. So if you were in one of the dimension balance class from last month, you've seen into detail how we run that report, and we'll run that again today just for the encumbrances of this line item. So we're going to go to general ledger, go to dimension balances, and we're going to put a time frame for this fiscal year. We're going to select the encumbrance book, and we don't want it combined with our accrual book, which houses our expenses. We only want encumbrances. So I'm going to uncheck that just so the encumbrance selection is what we're going to work through. We're using the actual data. We don't need budget for this one. We're just looking for encumbrances. We're going to run this with our utilities account. So I've selected that as the account from. It autofills to account to. So the report's going to be limited to just this account number and no other accounts. And now we're going to tell it what dimensions we want this to run. As users, we're required to have our program and checkbook at a minimum. If you have more than one funding source and you only want to search for one fund, then specify that here. Or if it's for any fund in this combination of the program and checkbook, you can leave it blank. So I'll leave it blank on this instance. If there was a customer, vendor, employee, or class that we wanted to run this for, then by all means you could do that. Or leave it blank just to make that for any circumstance, not just limited to a specific dimension. If it's our first time running this report, it's going to look like this. It's going to say Format, Show Dimension Values, Select. If it says this and we try to run the report, we're going to get an error at the top of the screen that tells us we have to select dimension values. So a selection has to be made here. What is it we want to display? So the first thing we probably want to choose from is our funding source. We want to make sure the funding source is present on our report in this case. Do we want to show the account ID? And we've only selected one account number, so maybe that's not so important. If we were using multiple accounts, certainly we could pick the account number. And if we wanted to know what vendor this was from, we have a choice. We can have just the name, just the ID, or the name and ID on one line. So we'll do vendor ID and name on one line. Now, if we run this report, we can see the 4 different vendors that are contributing to our balance for encumbrances. So we're a little bit closer to knowing what we need to take care of if there's stuff that's unpaid or what those transactions could be. It's still limited in that it's just giving us a summary total. It's not telling us what purchase orders those might be from, or if there's a voucher that wasn't approved, that kind of stuff. But what it does is gives us these balances. You can click on the link of the balances. In this case, for the Tribal Energy account, that's one transaction. Easy to find, right? We can click on this 269.16, and it's going to give us a link to the purchase requisition, not the purchase order. It's giving us a link to the request that created the encumbrance. So we can click there. Now we're at the requisition. And by viewing it and going to our history, we now have the purchase order that we need to work on, whether it's to close it or to make a payment with it. And so a little bit better than the financial report. If there's multiple uses for this vendor, so if we look at their Cherry Todd, it's a little bit busier on the general ledger report. So we might not want to take the time to click into 4 different encumbrance creations to find out which one hasn't been paid. What other steps can we take to view for that? So if we want to be more specific on finding these purchase orders, if we recall back to the slides, we can look up for purchase orders that might be pending, partially converted, that kind of stuff. So if we go to our purchase order workflow, so we're going to purchase order, we'll get a list of all of the transactions we've accessed if we're not currently using a custom view. Which means in this case, for just the IT revenue funds, since we've started Intacct, they've done 1,300 POs. That could be a lot to skim through if we're looking for the partially converteds or the pendings, that kind of stuff that is waiting for us to pay. That's pretty much a pretty big list. You can create your own views. So like the first thing we might think about doing is filtering this list to cut out anything before fiscal year 22. So we have an option here that says advanced filter. I'll choose a date, and I want the date to be equal to or greater than October 1st. So the middle part here is going to let me choose the filter type. So there's greater or equal. And we're going to choose October 1st of 21, start date of this fiscal year. And you can choose any time period. So if you work at Head Start and your fiscal year started September 1st or April 1st, by all means use that. So I'm going to apply this view, and our list of 1,300 purchase orders is now down to 54. Much more manageable, right? We can still go through this and see all the stuff we've converted into another type of document or the stuff that's waiting for us. We have an option if we wanted to just dice into this a little bit more. We can add as many filters as we want. And so now I might want the document state. We want this to include 2 specific ones here. Pending or say partially converted. You have to type the state exactly as it is on screen over here, and it's separated by the comma. So when I apply this, now we've gone down to 16. And so this is a screen. We can save this and then visit this daily or however frequent your program is doing transactions with those funds. So you can go to Manage View, Save View As, and we can say FY22 pending POs. Call it whatever you want to call it, has to be a unique name. So if you tried to duplicate this after I save this, you'd get the message that the name isn't unique. But now the next time we come back, we can come back here, select that view, and not have to continuously create that. We don't have to look at all the stuff that we've done, all the stuff we've paid before, only the things that need our attention now, rather than the list of all of it. And of course, you can do that by vendor or any other type of thing that's going to make it easier for you to manage those purchase orders, to know what you have sitting out there that's waiting for your attention. And you can do this with any of the other areas, whether it's purchase requisitions or contracts, wherever you got to go. You can do this for each of those. And maybe this, probably now at this point, a lot more efficient than either of those reports. We have exactly what we need to view. We have exactly what we need to take care of. Now we can take those actions. Okay, do we have any questions about this custom view or that dimension balance before I move on to the next report? All right. So in addition to running your financial report, using your dimension balance report, or creating a custom list view like I did here, there is another report called the Purchasing Transaction Detail Report. So if we go to the Report Center, if you're under All Reports, then just search the Report Center and you can start typing Purchasing Transaction Detail. That's going to come up. Or if you hit the gold star, so it's part of your favorites, you can get the list of reports you use on your favorites. Whichever one's easiest for you to manage. So we have the Purchasing Transaction Detail Report. And this is going to give us exactly that detail about our purchasing transactions. It defaults to the current year, so we're good here. We need to give it our checkbook and our program. If there's a specific funding source we're looking for, then by all means, you can enter that here. If there's a certain vendor we're searching, search for that vendor here. We're going to stick with utilities, so we'll use that as our item ID. And the last thing we need to tell it is what type of purchasing transaction are we looking for? We can leave it blank so we can see all, or we get a list of all the purchasing transactions that are out there. So now we can select the one that we want to use. So our choice is either all purchasing transactions or one specific type. So if we did purchase order, just like we did on that custom view, and we can go to state now and we can choose from the different document states to say, well, this is the only thing I want in return. We want the pending purchase orders and we want partially converted purchase orders. The stuff we know is going to be open and contributing to our encumbrance balance. So we have that, we'll click done, and now we can view the report. So as the report generates, it's going to give us a list of all the open purchase orders for utilities. We can see the link to each of the POs, and then just the basic stuff. When was the purchase order created? Our program, funding source, checkbook. Here's the document. Here's the total that was created to start. So if it's a blanket purchase order, we might see a change from the original amount that's encumbered. Here's our vendors. And as I scroll this report to the right a little bit, I have this quantity field. So we can see some of these are certainly blanket purchase orders. This top one here was open with $180. $60 has been converted so far, leaving $120 open. So if we ran this report, now we know, we thought we were finished with the Prairie Pest Control purchase order. Blanket POs don't close by themselves unless you fully exhaust that quantity field. So I know I still have to close the purchase order. And it doesn't matter the amount that remains unconverted, whether it's 1 cent or $60, it's going to stay open until you fully exhaust that line. And we can see the second line is another blanket purchase order. Actually, they're all blanket purchase orders. These ones have been opened but haven't been paid yet. But very quickly, we have that information we need again of what we need to take care of. If we weren't sure about our vouchers, if we customize this and we wanted to look up vouchers. So what state of a voucher that could currently be in existence that could be sitting there but not have released the encumbrance yet? It's an unpaid voucher, right? It's something that's unapproved. So we might have something that's been submitted, partially approved, or declined, or even drafted. If we converted the purchase order, then drafted the voucher because we're waiting for one more document to come in. So we'll search for these four types of vouchers. Still going to use utilities. No data found, meaning there's nothing that's been submitted currently, nothing that's been partially approved, nothing that's been declined, nothing that's been drafted. So because it says this doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. All that means is for the combination we've used to create this report, there is no data to report with. If we took these out and wanted to know what we've paid, in other words, what's been closed, as we've seen on one of the slides, and we rerun the report, when this is done running, all the utilities we've paid in FY22 have now shown up. And so now we know the vouchers that have been paid, the vendors that have been paid. If we put our invoice number in there, we certainly know which invoice has been paid. So if we weren't sure we've paid that invoice from Golden West, there's our confirmation we have. And at the end, there is a column that tells us what purchase order those came from also. So if you're working on figuring out, if you print your POs and keep a file of that, did I pay this PO or not? Pretty easily, we just figured that out. All right, do we have any questions about this purchasing transaction detail report? It's important, if you haven't used this or you're not comfortable using it, you have to make this part like a regular part of your workday. I think it's easier. That way we're not running on crunch time and on November 15th, our phones are blowing up over here because now we're trying to figure this out. Start running those now. Figure that out. Get comfortable with how to use particularly it's this purchasing info part of running this report. The type of purchasing transaction in those states. Get comfortable with what those mean and how to run those so you can dive into your information quickly and easily. All right. So we've seen multiple ways to find our balances, to find our purchase orders, to find a whole list of our open purchase orders or vouchers or any type of transaction. One of the things I wanted to go through is how you can easily send your purchase orders to your vendors. So if we go back to the purchase order screen, if we had just had this approved and Cherry Todd required a purchase order, we can certainly come down here to this tab over here, choose to either print, which is probably what many of us do for the ones we need to provide a purchase order to, or we can choose email. Cherry Todd happens to have an email tied to the vendor so that email fills in. If the email was blank, we could certainly type their email. If we needed to copy somebody or blind copy someone, by all means do that. One thing I want to bring up is right here on the from part of this email is my information is the default one for the tribe. So if you're going to use this form to email a vendor a document, please make sure to change this name to your name and your email. That way I don't get weird calls from vendors who have no idea who they're calling for, and makes it uncomfortable for me and the vendor for 10 minutes while we figure it out. And unfortunately with Intacct, this is going to be like this every single time you do this. You'd have to change this name and email every time you want to use this form. The easiest way to send us a single document, if we wanted to send all of these at one time, rather than having to do this, clicking through each one of those, under the purchasing menu, we have the option to print or email transactions. And so we come here, first thing we want to do is update who's sending this information. If it's you, you definitely want to put your email and your name there. That way, when the vendor gets this information, they know who it came from and they know who to contact. What period of time do we want to look for these documents we're going to email? Is it from just this month? Maybe it's the whole fiscal year. Okay. Next, how are we going to filter this? Is there a specific vendor we're looking to send? Or is it going to be all vendors? So we'll leave it blank. If we've previously printed or emailed the purchase order and we wanted to email it, we'd have to check this box to make sure that email gets or that other document gets included. If it's going to be just our utility ones, great. I'm going to use that item in this search here. So I only want to send those that have the utility there. Here's our checkbook. What is the state of document we're going to send? We only want to send approved stuff, right? We're not going to send stuff that's drafted. So we want to send posted deals. And probably you're going to see transaction type's going to say select if you haven't done this before. Well, what type of transactional document are we emailing? So we're going to do the purchase order. So we've got purchase order selected. Some programs have customized purchase orders created for them. So this is where they would select that. IT has one, CARES does one for Motorola. So they can. This is where they can select to use the different one than the default one we're accustomed to. Otherwise, leave it blank. If you don't have an email template created in Intacct, which you don't, we're going to leave this blank. So now that we have this stuff selected, we can click view, and it's going to take us to the list of all the purchase orders that meet this criteria. Here's all those things that are posted. Here's the list of all of it. Here's the amounts. We can hit the top box up here that just automatically checks this for us. And now we need to put an email address for the rest of those. For the ones that don't have email addresses, now we can come through and punch those in and then click print or email, print/email for that, for the selection we've made to then happen. And doing this would have taken me 1 minute to send all my open purchase orders to the vendors rather than going through individually and doing that. All right. Do we have any questions about printing or emailing these documents? Okay. I don't see any coming in. This is the last thing I was going to cover in this one. So we're a lot of material, but a pretty brief class with the stuff that we have to look at. All right, with no other questions then, everybody enjoy the rest of your day.